to use this technique.
Any questions for James at this point? Okay. Do you need the mic?
Thank you very much for the very informative introduction of the country. I have a background of international law, and this has been one of our case studies. So in our case study, we analyzed the jurisdiction. As we know, jurisdiction, we have personal jurisdiction and territorial jurisdiction. And after 1987, I remember, after the UN Convention on Law of the Sea, the Sealand actually lies within the territorial water of the United Kingdom. So that's why no country actually recognizes it. And according to another treaty, it's called Montevideo Declaration, a country becomes a state if it satisfies 4 conditions, like the 4 elements: population, territorial, government, and the capacity to enter international relations. Since no country recognizes Sealand, so it doesn't have the status of statehood, so it doesn't generate territorial jurisdiction of itself. So throughout all the discussions, I find the jurisdiction discussion somehow lack in the process. So I don't know whether some other tech issues, there are some kind of different opinions about jurisdiction, because of course cyberspace is different. It's quite different because they don't have an international convention yet. So could you please elaborate some points on jurisdictions? I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, and as you alluded to, there's actual law on when something is a state and when something isn't. As you mentioned, in 1987, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea let nations extend their territorial waters from 3 miles to 12 miles, and that leapfrogs over Sealand. So from that time, the United Kingdom has claimed that Sealand lies within its waters. Sealand's position is, oh, we were a state before then, so you can't just absorb us by that. But as you also said, no other state agrees with Sealand's position. There's actually been litigation over Sealand's status. One of the Germans tried to claim he was exempt from taxes because he was a citizen of Sealand, which led a German court to say, you're not, because Sealand isn't a state. This jurisdictional angle on the internet is endlessly fascinating. There was a time when people spoke about the internet as cyberspace and this separate jurisdiction. John Perry Barlow, a cattle rancher, lyricist for the Grateful Dead, and internet activist, wrote a famous document in 1996 called A Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace that begins, governments of the industrial world, you weary giants of flesh and steel, I come to you in cyberspace. You have no jurisdiction where we gather. You are not welcome here. And we are naturally independent of you. And people felt like, oh, when you go online, it's like going into the matrix. You go someplace else, you are not here in your body anymore. But that's turned out not to really be how we experience the internet. We experience it as an extension of our offline lives. It's something that's with us always now. That the internet is a kind of a layering over our experience. Our friends' messages and their updates come with us wherever we are. We're always in touch with them. We can shop from anywhere. We can communicate from anywhere. We can listen to music and watch movies from anywhere. We can experience all of this wherever we are. It's not as though we suddenly disappear from our bodies and disembody into some new space. The internet is, in that sense, everywhere. So it's not increasingly not treated as a separate jurisdiction, but instead the contacts people have with each other online become the medium through which courts and countries worry about jurisdiction. Did you do something harmful to me? Well then, the place where I live in the country in which I'm a citizen may be concerned about your doing that to me if you did it online. So there are relatively few places in which the place of something matters for internet purposes. Instead, it's much more about the people who are interacting by online means and their connections to countries and communities.
Might have sparked some questions.
What would happen if Sealand decided to intervene in the next U.S. presidential election?
Sealand did offer Julian Assange asylum when he was on the run from Sweden. He didn't take them up on it. It would have been rough, probably about as comfortable as a stay in Ecuadorian embassy would have been. I think the same thing can happen if Sealand has done most of its activities, which is they'd be ignored. Sealand doesn't have a office building full of hundreds of highly trained computer specialists trying to engage in information operations. They've got 2 web-savvy young people who are interested in self-promotion. They just don't have the resources to be enough of a threat for the country to worry about.
Hi, I wonder if you could help clarify the importance of the location of the servers particularly, and how that kind of works with, let's say for instance, a company is incorporated in a particular country, but their servers that they use to do their business are located in Sealand. How does that work exactly with the international law?
Well, that's the great joke. It doesn't work. The entire play of you put your servers on there and you escape from law, that's a fantasy. Simpson Garfinkel's article says, imagine this company, Micromax, which has its servers on Sealand. So the police come with a warrant for data stored on their servers, and they say, nope, we don't have them, they're on Sealand. The next step in that, in an actual court, would be the police go to the court and get an order directing you to turn over the data because you have control over it, even though the servers aren't here. And in fact, that's exactly what happened when US law enforcement came for data held by Microsoft. And Microsoft said, but it's on servers in Ireland, and we don't want to violate Irish law by bringing it back. The case was brought to the Supreme Court when Congress stepped in and passed the Cloud Act, which says, companies of the world, you have to produce data in response to lawful requests by police overseen by courts, no matter where the data is stored. So, for those purposes, offshoring data does not help. The only way to make it work is to offshore your data and offshore yourself, or offshore the data and hide so effectively they have no person to go after.
Thank you so much for this fascinating case study. I was wondering if you could speak to, I feel like you explained a lot about the procedural implications in this case study, but maybe could you talk about the ideological implications, particularly in regards to the manifesto that you're talking about with cyberspace? I know there was recently a paper about the rise of white nationalism from data and society that talked about neo-Nazis really being inspired by the manifesto for cyberspace and feeling like this was, that the internet would be a place for white nationalism to live. And maybe could you talk about how a sense of space is negotiated with the user, and what do we, the people on an island that's like pseudo-micronation, to do with this example that you gave, and what is the future?
Wow, I'm going to have a very hard time living up to the sophistication of the question. I'll do my best. So one of the things that's been celebrated about the internet, and also condemned about it, is the ability for like-minded people to come together and form communities of interest. And you can see how this can have very different reactions depending upon what the community is. So if it's a community of people who are disabled, then they may not have access to physical spaces in the same way, but they can actually communicate and connect online, find their shared interests, find a shared political identity around making the world more accessible to each other, and they can find each other in ways that would be extremely hard offline. You can see the same dynamic working with white nationalists, that people who can't easily go out and place ads saying, I'm looking for lots of other white nationalists to join me. We've reached the point at which that it's condemned enough that the social pressure will prevent them from openly congregating. But if they have their own private discussion groups that are hard to spot, if they can discuss under assumed names so it's hard to track them, and you can't link them back to real world identities, and if they can do things like use YouTube videos to draw people in, then that community can also form. And despite the fact that their actual avowed goal is ultimately to eliminate by violence people who are different from them, for purposes of the internet, they're just another community with a shared interest coming together. And the fact that we share this space together, that we live in a world with people with whom we share a lot, people with whom we have less in common, that the connections and diversity, that's in some sense the ultimate thing that distinguishes those two communities. But that's not a difference at the level of how the community forms. It's a difference at the level of what their goals are for living together in the world. And there's at least one dimension of your question I have failed to address.
Oh, I was just gonna add that, you know, we all live in this community together, right? You were saying how like we access the internet as an extension of ourselves, but then we have, like say like Google is a proprietary algorithm that's curating the information we have access to. And we were saying, you know, define community. What those search results that are getting called back are disproportionately influenced by, say like nationalists, you know, things like that. So how do we negotiate? What do you do with this space that you gave us? Like how do we negotiate this space?
Yeah, there's maybe two levels you can appreciate this on. One of them is the level of who controls what is seen by other people online. And so this becomes about how do you get your message out through search engines, through YouTube, through Twitter, through all of these social media to people. And this is an area in which Data and Society, which you mentioned, have been doing really good reports on how different groups use the internet to advance their agendas in different ways. So one example would be the anti-vaccination community, which has been very effective at dominating results around search queries by just being more intense and more on the ground and having lots of content to promote. And therefore, their content will often fill what is we call a data void. If there's a topic that's obscure because people have written about it, anybody searching for that can find your thing if you just put your thing out there quickly and fill enough of it. Obscure topics that become suddenly popular, like the names of towns where there have been shootings, are very easy to fill if you and your friends just go online and start posting immediately about how there was no shooting against all crisis actors. People searching for that topic will find your thing, and you shape the conversation in what can be a very misleading and harmful way. And it's a really hard question, how these companies that do the searches, that recommend videos, that connect the speakers and listeners, how they pick which speech to point to and which not to. It's an incredibly hard set of problems, and you see those companies massively increasing their attention to how they do it and getting a lot of criticism both for what they do and for what they don't do. Bringing this back to Sealand specifically, I think that there's this thread of libertarianism that runs through a lot of the discourse about the internet. It's there in John Perry Barlow's Declaration of Independence. It's there in a lot of these dreams. And that vision has some very positive things to it. It has the internet as a vision of freedom. This is part of the idea at the beginning of the Arab Spring. You see this in a lot of movements where people can come together and promote political activism. The internet has incredible power for organizing and making political movements happen effectively on the ground. But that libertarianism is often connected, and historically been connected in some of the same ways to militia movements and fringe communities that deny the authority of government. you see some of the same arguments about why governments can't touch the internet. They sound an awful lot like the arguments made by tax protesters who say, well, this court has no authority over me because the flag in the courtroom has gold fringe on it. That's the martial flag of war, not the American flag of peace. And, oh yes, also, if I write my name in all caps, then because you wrote that on the complaint served against me, I don't need to respond. My name in all caps is some fictitious entity, not me. The court has no jurisdiction over me. These same kind of arguments sound like the arguments that Sealand is a state and it has population and territory and diplomatic recognition, and therefore you can't touch us, we're in cyberspace. So that trend of saying government has no power here puts the crypto libertarians who put servers in obscure places like this and use strong encryption in some very uncomfortable company.
Yeah, how many the population is it? What's the population of Sealand?
Typically one. Sometimes it's 2 or 3, but it's usually 1 at a time.
Okay, so, I mean, it's a technology which is obviously, people want to, people out there who want to publish whatever, free speech, promote the most extreme. Like, it was interesting, the example with Sealand, they had some scruples and said, no, we're not going to have child pornography, so that was them having scruples about that. Then there could be someone else on Sealand too that didn't care about that. And on the legal side, you have Europe trying to give people more rights to data privacy, which I guess works better for big companies who care about the big fine, but if you're in some isolated libertarian place where you're hosting stuff or a dark web, then you can totally ignore that. So overall, is the law moving, do you think the law will be successful in trying to maybe bring a little bit of order and less, the other example would be something like the YouTube video posted of the New Zealand shooting and then YouTube fumbled to try to get it off. Is the law actually going to rein in stuff, or is the law just doesn't have a chance?
So I think it's possible for spaces that seem lawless online to come back within some semblance of what we think of as conforming to social values and the rule of law. It may not be the same one that was before. I'll give you an example, which is copyright. So you go back to the early 2000s, it seems like copyright is completely collapsing. These are the days of Napster, when people start uploading music and sharing it with the world, and suddenly you can download anything for free just by installing the software on your computer. You browse online, you can get any song you want. And it's true that sales of recorded music on shiny plastic discs drop off a cliff. And like record industry sales from CDs plummet by something like 50% in the space of 5 years. But we haven't wound up in a world where nobody pays for music anymore, or movies, or no creative works are made because nobody will pay for them. We've somehow very rapidly shifted. Through a brief period, people mostly paid for downloads to your computer. The dominant way of paying for music now is a streaming service like Spotify or Apple Music. And people pay for that. They actually pay. And they get access to an immense catalog of music you can listen to as much as you want. And the amount you pay gets split up among artists in proportion to how much they're streamed. Now, this is a different way of paying for it. The total revenue is not where it was before. It definitely promotes some different styles of music. Songs have gotten a little shorter and a little more immediately catchy so that you don't flip to the next song. But copyright has not died. The system is still there. People pay for creativity. It's reached some intermediate state where it's no longer as controlled as it used to be back when people just bought CDs and with 1% of CD at a time. But it's not the complete anarchy of anybody can get anything they want for free. And that may be possible in other spaces too. So if you think about privacy as an example, or harmful speech, it may be that we reach a state in which yeah, somebody's probably able to post the video of the shooting and keep it online. But most people are not going to have it thrust in their face when they are browsing their Facebook feeds. It will not be suggested to them on YouTube. It will not be present for most people most of the time. And that may be the kind of state we wind up on. Privacy and a bunch of other issues, not where we used to be, but not in total anarchy either.
Frank Ferenc. My involvement with the internet started late 70s, early 80s, okay, and I've seen a lot of technologies come and go, and I've worked on digital currency in the 90s, and we found out limitations and said, here's where it might fail. That's exactly what's happening with Bitcoin. It's pretty easy to predict. I've also worked on private exchanges, so people want to avoid the SEC and regulatory environment. And so in the end, out of all of those things, on the, for example, in private exchanges, what people really wanted, even though you can avoid all the laws, is that people still want to pay for things that sort of look like regulation. Maybe not the regulation that's here, okay, but they still want the fairness. They want all of those things because they want to have something stable, as I said, not necessarily what we have now, but they still want it. So that doesn't really go away. The other thing that we found out with cryptocurrency, or with currency I should just say, is in the end, it relies on a construct called trust, of which Bitcoin cannot solve that right now through encryption and stuff like that. So you're still relying upon institutional constructs, okay? And then the last thing is that identity is really important, and it's easily available. So like we have a lot of anonymous people who complain about whatever, but identity is something that it depends on how much you want to enforce it in your society. So there's no issue with privacy and stuff like that. It's just really more from a regulatory thing. So in the end, Sealand still had to communicate with someone else. So if you wanted, for example, a white supremacist, they still can go off in their private room, okay, and do whatever they want privately, and no one will know. But once they start interacting, then you have the other constructs that in the end will rein them in, and it's up to how much you want to force it and how much rulemaking you want to have that possibly goes against some other societal issues.
You brought up copyright and intellectual property law. I have encountered paywalls for what I believe should be free exchange of intellectual ideas, mostly instituted by publishers of scientific and technical material. And a lot of people in the technical and academic world who aren't associated with wealthy institutions like Cornell that can afford to have libraries with subscriptions feel blocked out by this. The Constitution mandates intellectual property law for the promotion of progress in the sciences and useful arts. Do you feel that present intellectual property law needs a lot of fixing for things like this, and also patent trolls and other obstructions to progress?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of places in which IP laws are stepping on the progress that they're supposed to promote. So the distribution of scientific ideas is absolutely one of them. I myself try whenever I can to publish under an open license. Just get the PDFs myself, have the copyright right to post it publicly, and let anybody else who gets it post it publicly. There are moves in that direction with mandates that publicly funded science must be made available in a copyright unrestricted format within 6 months being published. But yeah, the licensing practices that go up around this entrench a few large publishers and like a few universities that can afford to pay for it, increasingly few, and many more of them find themselves having to break these, stop their deals and stop paying for journals. This is just an unsustainable situation. And then there are a lot of other places where the he mentioned patent laws as well, which is in many ways in which they're very out of step with technology and society today. Like, I personally have no idea what's actually patentable when it comes to software. The Supreme Court thinks that it does, but I'm not sure that they actually do.
A general question only because of the mentioning of privacy, online privacy, and legal protection. Like, a detective can spy out people online and use that material against that person. Is that correct or not correct?
So we're going through an interesting transition right now about online privacy. I mean, for many years it's been very much anything goes, and any information that can be found is fair game to be used. In the last couple of years, we've started to see some court decisions that put stronger limits on police investigations. The police can't just look through your cell phone when they're arrested. They can't just go to the phone company and get a list of all the places that your phone has been without a judge's approval. We haven't seen as much motion on the private side. You don't have as many protections against the detective, the private detective, going and investigating your online trails. But Europe has made much stronger stands towards privacy in the last few years. They have a new general data protection regulation that puts a lot of strong duties on people who control personal data to keep it secure, to use it only for the purposes they collected it for, to get consent for those uses, and to delete the data when it's no longer necessary. The United States does not have a comprehensive privacy law like that, but we're starting to see very strong trends in that direction. California just enacted a California state-level privacy law that is in some ways very similar to the GDPR, and other states are strongly considering it. Washington is looking at it. There may be a sudden and very strong move towards much more strong privacy protections in the US.
Any other questions? All right, let's give James another round of applause. Thank you so very, very much. A lot of information for us all to digest.
And thank you all for joining us this evening. I had a great time.
Thank you for coming, and we'll see you at the next one. Hopefully it'll be the same place so we can all get together before too long.